All right, so I am recording. Everything is working, and I'm picking up. I am picking up in the book and just moving along. And if you are following along, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. And I also have a new Substack now, and yeah, I'll drop information about that in this private unlisted podcast. But at anywho, yeah, it's just kind of a Substack about well, kind of bringing in my favorite topics, really, media psychology and Buddhism. So yeah, but we are looking at On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, who is an American Buddhist monk, and he's widely respected for his translation of Buddhist texts and teachings on meditation and the Dhamma. Click. I just read my own instruction. Click pin for more information. But yeah, that's what we're reading, and you can click the pin if you're in the Discord server and you're looking at the book club channel. There is a nested thread there called Notes from On the Path that you can maybe bookmark, and that's really where I keep the conversation going. It's really a conversation that I'm having with myself. but every once in a while someone jumps in, and I love it. And I got to have a really great conversation with someone just the other day, and it was awesome. And it inspired me to actually write my second Substack post. So yeah, really always love it when people come. Okay, but right now I got to pull up the book here, and yeah, let's get it going on. And so we're picking up with at the bottom of page 156. And we're now really getting into the, that aspect of Buddhism that has always been a great stretch for me. And I think it's been a great stretch for anyone who's Western and more secular or secularized, because it's getting into the cosmology. It's getting into the Vedantic kind of cosmology of Buddhism and karma. And, as I've mentioned before, so what's my relationship to all of that? As someone who's a Westerner, I just try to approach all of this with beginner's mind. The deal is that I've had some pretty incredible experiences in meditation, some of which I can't explain with my reasoning mind. And, I try not to pass much judgment on things of that nature, so I find a lot in Buddhism that is very, very reasonably, practically applicable today. But today's reading, it's going to be a stretch, and I'm really looking forward to being uncomfortable and a lot of question marks and wow, okay, well, alrighty then, because that's what's going to be going on for me, and that's okay. So let me just make sure I have the Discord open too, in case anybody comes in. Okay, here we go. So from Sutta 59. I designate the rebirth of one who has sustenance, and then in brackets, clinging, Vaka, who's an ascetic monk that he's talking to, and not of one without sustenance. Just as a fire burns with sustenance, and not without sustenance. Even so, I designate the rebirth of one who has sustenance, and not of one without sustenance. But Master Gotama, at the moment a flame is being swept on by the wind and goes a far distance, what do you designate as its sustenance then? Vaka, when a flame is being swept on by the wind and goes a far distance, I designate it as wind sustained, for the wind is its sustenance at that time. And at the moment when a being sets this body aside and is not yet reborn in another body, what do you designate as its sustenance then? Vaka, when a being sets this body aside and is not yet reborn in another body, I designate it as craving sustained, for craving is its sustenance at that time. And that comes from SN 44:9. And so there's so much of this, as I just mentioned, that can easily be applied to this life. So I'll do my best here to, kind of provide frame. And also remember that I'm not a scholar. I have no training. I didn't come up on, so I won't repeat all of that here. Okay, this is just my understanding from, various teachers quite a long time ago, but a long time practice. So he's talking to this monk, right? And it's kind of like this teaching kind of moment, where it's, I thank you so much to the guest, who reminded me that these were written, as is understood, to be kind of presented as rhetorical, sort of, not rhetorical, but as, oral kind of presentations, right? So this conversation didn't just happen like, he's walking down the road and he sees this ascetic guy, hey, this was kind of more presented for students. And so, Vaka's asking these really great questions, that, yeah, and the first one is, well, it begins with the Buddha making a very declarative statement. I designate the rebirth of one who has clinging and not of one who doesn't have clinging. So really, per the usual, right? Buddha is really, really concise. And so Vaka naturally has questions about this, right? What do you mean, right? What do you mean clinging? What do you mean that the reason why we experience rebirth is because we're clinging to something? How can that be, right? How can that be that that's what drives karma? And so Kama said, and before Vaka gets to his kind of further questioning, Buddha is complaining, a little Freudian slip, maybe he was, I don't know. Buddha is explaining, he's kind of drawing this analogy, right, to how fire works. How if you just observe fire and how does it work? So he says, just as fire burns with sustenance, right? So what keeps a fire going is that which is in its path that is consumable, right? So in wood, or I'm not an expert in this field most certainly, right? But anything there that isn't a retardant of fire is gonna fuel the fire. Right, and this goes back to earlier sections, and will continue to go on throughout the book. Cause and suffering, cause and suffering, cause and suffering, cause and suffering. We're in right view, right? The Four Noble Truths, particularly, not particularly, but just going back in and looking at those Four Noble Truths. So he's saying, well, okay, but he's saying, okay, but what about this, right? He's saying, a flame can really go far. It can jump. It doesn't necessarily need to have something really tangible to keep it going. It can still fire can spread for miles, right? And the Buddha's saying, well, in that particular instance, then it's the wind. But there's always something. So as he goes on, right, the clear consensus that Buddha, not consensus, but the clear message that the Buddha has to offer here to Vaka, this ascetic monk, is there is something. In this case, it's the wind. And then again, Vaka comes back with another really excellent question. He's saying, okay, well, what's going on between lives, right? Between the death of this body and the birth into the next body. What's going on there? What's sustaining that process? Great questions, right? He says craving. And this is where, let me just check the Discord really quick, because again, I don't have notifications on. Oh, hey, hello. See, sorry, I don't have my notifications on, so I didn't realize anyone was here. My apologies. And I will keep this chat up, and feel free to drop in any questions. And I was just talking about the very first sutta, which I just kind of dove into, which was Sutta 59. And he's having this conversation And I was just commenting on that. And so I'm just going to keep on moving and welcome. It's great to have you both here. And yeah, feel free to drop anything in the chat. I record this for a podcast that I have that's unlisted. I actually wrote the author to ask if I could, even though it's in the Creative Commons. In my earlier episodes, I curse a little bit. And so I try not to do that, but I just want to make sure he's cool with that. So, hey, great. Oh, great. Well, I don't use names in here, so I'll just say I hear what you're writing in the chat, and right on. I'm loving this book so far. This is episode 31 for me, and we're only on page 156. We're only into Right View, which is the first of the 8. So, yeah. I'm going to keep on reading. As Venerable Ananda was sitting there, the Blessed One said to him, I say categorically, Ananda, that bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct should not be done. Given that the Blessed One has declared, Lord, that bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct should not be done, what drawbacks can one expect when doing what should not be done? One can fault oneself. Observant people, on close examination, criticize one. One's bad reputation gets spread about. One dies confused, and with the breakup of the body after death, one reappears in the plane of deprivation, the bad destination, the lower realms, in hell. I say categorically, Ananda, that good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct should be done. Given that the Blessed One has declared, Lord, that good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct should be done, what rewards can one expect when doing what should be done? One doesn't fault oneself. Observant people, on close examination, praise one's good reputation, gets spread about. One dies unconfused, and with the breakup of the body after death, one reappears in a good destination, a heavenly world. And that comes from AN 2:18. Woo! Just take a little breather there. Whoops, let me fix this here so I can get back to it and look at it again. So as I was saying, I'm so sorry that I didn't quite see when you came in, but I was talking just a moment ago about how these were designed to be provided as teachings. So though it kind of feels like a couple of people, sitting down and, having a couple of teas or whatever, that it's really kind of designed more for an oral presentation. So here he's saying, beginning off, he's saying, well, why maybe would you not want to practice, bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct? So what's, from a practical perspective, why might that not be a great idea to do? Buddha says here, let me scroll down. So he begins with one can fault oneself. Okay, so I'll just kind of start with that one. And talked about this in earlier sections, and I'm sure it'll appear again. And it particularly gets talked about way back in the early part of the book where, I can't remember which chapter it is, I think it's in chapter 1, Bhikkhu here begins all the chapters with commentary, which I find very, very useful. And he also has a whole section on how the Buddha actually taught his son. And so it talks about this quite a bit in that section as well. Why? Why is it important to, kind of practice the Eightfold Path? Why is it important to practice these rites from a practical perspective? What's in it for me? And so this idea of, you can fault yourself. I think a good analogy for me to help me make sense of this has to do with a Substack that I just launched a Substack, kind of excited about it. And I actually asked some of the people in here, I gave some options and I said, hey, pick one. And the option that was picked was pornography, digital pornography. And so my background's in media psychology, so I did some research and looked at all the current studies that are out right now and, what we're learning about, adolescence and the developing adolescent brain and pornography. And I don't want to get too far down the road, But what I'm remembering right now as I read this part, right, where the Buddha's saying, well, you could fault yourself. That's a bummer. The fact that you're going to fault yourself. So there's this one study that I was reading for this, right, that came out like last year. And it's a qualitative study where what they do, so, and again, not to insult your intelligence at all, but in case you don't know, like what kind of study that is, it just means that, rather than giving people like a bunch of tests to take and then looking at all the metrics of what comes back, they're actually asking them questions, and maybe they're interviewing them and recording that, or whatever the case may be, and then they're going back and they're coding it to kind of look for themes that are popping out among all the participants. And one of the things that was coming back was this right here, what the Buddha is describing. And it's not just in Buddhism, by the way. All the wisdom traditions kind of have this idea, as if I would know, right? But to my understanding, this idea that here's what the consensus was. And this was actually a direct quote that I pulled and included in my post from one of the young men who participated in this study. And he said, I'm paraphrasing obviously because I'm not looking at it, but he said something along the lines of, and by the way, this is also what I learned, is that porn, I'm an older lady, I'm a Gen Xer, but nowadays, porn is considered actually quite normal socially. It's a place for people to, and again, I'm just the messenger. If this is insulting to you, my apologies, and maybe I should give a trigger, I'm relaying what I'm learned in writing this post. So this young guy was saying, well, I like it. It's fun. I watch it with my friends. We laugh. It's, I learned some things from it. And then he goes on to say, but there's just this part of me that just feels really bad. That, I look at some of it and I feel like it's not treating women right. Some of the stuff that I've watched, it's not treating, and so there's this part of me that feels really, really guilty about it. So I know that was a really long explanation, but that is what, to my understanding, the Buddha is talking about here. He's not saying you should fault yourself. He's saying you will. I mean, unless you're like not to judge, but unless you're like suffering with, psychopathology, you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel shame. And again, if you want to, find out more about what Buddha had to say about all of that, remember, and again, you're not really going to hear like judgmental words in Buddhism, like should have done that, that's good or that's bad. That idea of good, that duality, that's really more of a kind of a Western kind of Judeo-Christian idea. When you start getting into like Buddhism or Hinduism, and you start getting into like more non-dual, you're not really using language like that. It's good to, you should feel, yeah. It's more like, this is probably what's going to happen, right? Because if you go above and you look up at the beginning of Sutta 60, right? He's saying what is the language? Well, it's not exact language, right? Because it's in Pāli, but what drawbacks? Isn't that great? It's so practical, right? There's no you should. Right? There's, hey, what are the drawbacks? I just love that. Okay, so there's that one. You're probably going to feel bad, right? You're probably going to feel bad if you practice bodily misconduct. And again, we're going to get into all this stuff, and this is all stuff we've also looked at previously. What is bodily misconduct that'll appear throughout. So, he's saying you're probably going to feel bad, and I know I do. I know that I think the big one for me I would say would be verbal misconduct. If you follow my podcast, then you know that I get to practice with anger. I feel like I was born with it. I had it even as a little girl. My mom told me that, if that I was just a scrappy little kid. And it's something that I still work with. And it's something that when I practice verbal misconduct, in other words, when I'm unskillful with my speech, and I talked about this in the last episode, I feel it, it smarts, it hurts my heart. I know that might sound hokey, but I, for lack of a better word, how do I know? Well, there's several things that I kind of clue into, and how I clue into it is from 25 years of meditation. That's at least my opinion. Their body language. So I notice their reaction because I'm showing up in the conversation, so I'm paying attention to it. So there's a lot of things going on there, but I do I do fault myself, and then I have to deal with that. Then I have to deal with the ramifications of feeling guilty, of knowing that I hurt someone, that I was unskillful. So that's kind of how I work with that one. So then he says there's another drawback to not being skillful. And this is a hard pill, right? And, you know, I certainly have come across this, and perhaps you have as well. Buddha says, well, the other drawback is that you're going to meet really observant people. And that they're going to see your behavior and they're going to criticize it. They're going to be like, oh, you know, what's going on there? You know, and I think, you know, I try to keep politics way out of this. I'll just say that I think that we can see this make manifest in a lot of ways in all over the world, right? Where, especially when people are maybe have a platform, regardless of what that platform is, observant people will call out and criticize unskillful, right? And we see that, right? Social media has kind of made that possible, that we can observe. And again, I know I got to keep, I'm gonna keep reading here because I need to get through this. See, this is why I have 31 episodes and we're only on Right View. So see what happens. So, you know, there's a lot going on here, but I think that's a really good motivator, you know, is, and then that leads to the next one, right? That a bad reputation can develop. And that's problematic, right? Because we live in a world where we co-regulate with other humans. And so, again, there's this practical aspect to all of this. So I'll just keep on reading and check in the chat. Okay, right on. So I'm just going to keep on going. Yeah, and I don't think I need to say anything more about that. You know, it's almost very lyrical or very kind of poetic. You know, he repeats a lot of stanzas, repeats structure. Here he's using the same exact structure, but he's just saying, hey, here's the kind of things you can expect that might be nice, right? If you actually practice mindful, you know, you're more mindful with your body and your behavior and your mind. Yeah. And I'm just going to keep on. Yeah, I'll keep on going. Okay, so where am I here? La 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 la. Sutta 61. And forgive me, I do my best with names, but yeah. So as they were sitting there, the Kalamas of Kesuputta said to the Blessed One, Lord, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who come to Kesuputta. They expound and glorify their own doctrines. But as for the doctrines of others, they deprecate them, disparage them, show contempt for them, and pull them to pieces. And then other contemplatives and Brahmins come to Kesuputta. They expound and glorify their own doctrines. But as for the doctrines of others, they deprecate them, disparage them, show contempt for them, and pull them to pieces. They leave us absolutely certain and in doubt. Which of these venerable contemplatives and Brahmins are speaking the truth, and which ones are lying? Of course you are uncertain, Kalamas. Of course you are in doubt. When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So in this case, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by pondering views, by probability, or by the thought. This contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these Dhammas are unskillful, these Dhammas are blameworthy, these Dhammas are criticized by the observant, these Dhammas, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and to suffering, then you should abandon them. What do you think, Kalamas? When greed arises in a person, does it arise for welfare or for harm? For harm, Lord. And this greedy person, overcome by greed, his mind possessed by greed, kills living beings, takes what is not given, goes after another person's wife, tells lies, and induces others to do likewise, all of which is for long-term harm and suffering? Yes, Lord. And so here in brackets, Bhikkhu has similarly with aversion and delusion. And so again, it's that idea that the Buddha used these stanzas, right? So he's just saying that he repeats the same exact stanza, right? But instead of using greed, he uses aversion and he uses delusion, right? So he's saying, you could apply this, right? Is this true or is this not true? So what do you think, Kalamas? Are these Dhammas skillful or unskillful? Unskillful, Lord. Blameworthy or blameless? Blameworthy, Lord. Criticized by the observant or praised by the observant? Criticized by the observant, Lord. When adopted and carried out, do they lead to harm and to suffering or not? When adopted and carried out, they lead to harm and to suffering. That is how it appears to us. Now, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement, through pondering, views, by probability, or by the thought. This contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these Dhammas are skillful, these Dhammas are blameless, these Dhammas are praised by the observant, these Dhammas, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and to happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. What do you think, Kalamas? When lack of greed arises in a person, does it arise for welfare or for harm? For welfare, Lord. And for this ungreedy person, not overcome by greed, his mind not possessed by greed, doesn't kill living beings, take what is not given, go after another person's wife, tell lies, or induce others to do likewise, all of which is for long-term welfare and happiness. Yes, Lord. And then once again in brackets, similarly with lack of aversion and lack of delusion. So what do you think, Kalamas? Are these Dhammas skillful or unskillful? Skillful, Lord. Blameworthy or blameless? Blameless, Lord. Criticized by the observant or praised by the observant? Praised by the observant, Lord. When adopted and carried out, do they lead to welfare and to happiness or not? When adopted and carried out, they lead to welfare and to happiness. That is how it appears to us. And that's the end of AN 3:66. And I love that it ends that way. That is how it appears to us. Interesting choice. And I think it's one that really speaks to, again, obviously this is coming from my view, my subjective experience of my own practice and the teachings that I've had. This is how it appears to us. Buddha is always really, really clear. And again, there's just this really practical look. When you're greedy and you try to take stuff that isn't yours and you steal and you lie and you try to get other people to behave like that, you think that's helpful and good for the world or not? It's very, very practical. And leaving it like this, he's saying, you tell me. You tell me. And I think this is a part, and I know I go on and on about getting a little, out of disjointed sometimes about, I realize I get a little bit clingy and disjointed about the Western approach to Buddhism and kind of how it's been changed significantly. This is part of why the Buddha warned you can't take ethics, that the Eightfold Path is kind of it's the whole backbone of Buddhism. And the Eightfold Path is a path of ethics. And so, all of that, those other rights, the right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, that's just a part of it. But this sutta here to me is really getting at the real meat and potatoes of the Four Noble Truths, the real meat and potatoes of seeing karma, cause and effect. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It's, seeing it in real time. He's saying, look, man, see for yourself, try it out. And you can try this out. And I talked about this in a different episode, N=1. Right? N=1. That's the participation size. So N=1. Who's one? You. You're one. Try it out for yourself. Do a little experiment if you want to, just to see. I don't want to recommend that you practice bad behavior to see what it takes for you to feel bad. Nothing like that. But I mean, anyway, I'm going on and on. Okay, but that to me is what the real meat and potatoes of this particular sutta is. And again, we are in the thick of karma right now, right view, right? So the West has a hard time with this, but you know, there is a cosmological aspect to Buddhism. Okay, so we're in Sutta 62. Now, what is old karma? The eye is to be seen as old karma, fabricated and willed, capable of being felt. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the intellect is to be seen as old karma, fabricated and willed, capable of being felt. This is called old karma. And what is new karma? Whatever karma one does now with the body, with speech, or with the intellect. This is called new karma. And that's from SN 35:145. So to my view, this is an incredibly radical sutta here. It's incredibly radical to my view. So now we're kind of getting into the 5 aggregates. So, you know, he's saying, so what is karma, right? So karma, so again, I hope I'm doing good. I think I'm doing, last week there was someone here who comes from the region and said I was doing good. So I'm like, oh, okay. So here's my understanding. Karma, right? Karma is this kind of momentum. I like that word. It's kind of like this residue, this momentum. This is the cosmological aspect of Buddhism, right? Coming from the Vedas and all that good stuff. So here he's saying, so old karma, okay, old karma is all of that. So here he's using the word fabrication. Fabrication comes up a lot. And again, talked about fabrication a lot earlier on in the book. So what is fabrication? In Buddhism, fabrication, in essence, is the 5 aggregates. So the view is, I'm standing here right now talking to you, right? As I'm standing here talking to you, my eyes are open. I can see what's on my wall. I have my peripheral. I can see the waveform in my audio editor right now moving. I can see my mic. I can see all of that. I can smell things from the open window. I can hear things going on. My body on the inside is feeling not so great right now because of what I ate. So there's all of these things that are happening now, and then now, and then now, and then now. And all of that is constantly working together, if you will. And all of that is called the fabricated kind of state in Buddhism, if you will. And so here he's saying, so the eye is to be seen as old, right? So we die and we lose our sight, right? So that's in other words, all of that, what we saw with our past, what we saw 5 minutes ago, what we saw last week, what we saw when we were 5, what we saw when we were 12, what we saw when we were 25. I'm a Gen Xer. What I saw when I was 30, what I saw when I was 40, what I saw when I was 50, right? All of that eye, that is old karma. The ear, the nose, right? There's certain smells that I can smell to this day. Dove soap, the smell of Dove soap. As soon as I smell that smell, the hair on my arm stands on end and I immediately can see my grandmother's face, right? So all of these phenomena, that's fabrication in Buddhism. And so he's saying all of this, right? The nose, the eye, the ear, all this phenomena is old karma. The tongue, the body, taste, all of it. Phenomena arising, right? And then he says, what's new karma? This is the radical part. So what does he say here? Whatever one does now. This, to my mind, is the really, really radical part. This is why oftentimes you'll hear people describe Buddhism as universal. And you'll also hear this idea that if you can even contemplate on that, meditate on that, journal about that, whatever, think about that idea for a second. What is new karma? Right? Whatever karma one does now, with the body, with speech, or with the intellect, this is called new karma. So we're constantly creating karma. Okay, well, I'm going to keep on going, but yeah, that's a pretty, I think that's very exciting. If you can remember that, then it's like, wow, that provides that urgency. When I see people in the Discord server talking about, man, how do you generate a discipline, to practice. And then I also coach, and I get that a lot from my, from clients, it's like, well, how do you discipline? And I think to my mind and to Buddha's mind too, apparently, because he talks about this a lot, you'll hear him use the word urgency. You need to feel really urgent about it. Like, man, this is really important. What I mean is, like I think about people that I've met in my life who went to the doctor and the doctor said, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to be dead in 10 years. And boom, they just changed. That kind of urgency. And you can cultivate that kind of urgency. And so one of the ways that Buddha said you could cultivate it was to contemplate or to meditate on things like this. And that is why we practice right concentration, right mindfulness, and for me personally as a Buddhist, this is why I meditate every day, is so that I am more likely to behave mindfully off the mat since I am producing karma now and now and now and now and now. Okay, I'm just, all right, no chats. I'm going to keep on going. So check the clock. Wow, man, time flies when you're being verbose. Sorry I talk so much. What can I tell you? Okay, so Sutta 63. Then a certain monk went to the Blessed One and, on arrival, having bowed down to him, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, the world, in brackets, loka, so that might be in Pāli, it is said, in what respect does the word world apply? Insofar as it disintegrates, and then in brackets, lujati, so that must be the Pāli. So let me just go back. Insofar as it disintegrates, monk, it is called the world. Now, what disintegrates? The I disintegrates. Forms disintegrate. I consciousness disintegrates. I contact disintegrates. And whatever there is that arises in dependence on I contact, experienced as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, that too disintegrates. The ear disintegrates. Sounds disintegrate. The nose disintegrates. Aromas disintegrate. The tongue disintegrates. Tastes disintegrate. The body disintegrates. Tactile sensations disintegrate. The intellect disintegrates. Ideas disintegrate. Intellect consciousness disintegrates. Intellect contact disintegrates. And whatever there is that arises in dependence on intellectual contact, experienced as pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, that too disintegrates. Insofar as it disintegrates, it is called the world. Oh yeah. So that's SN 35:82. So in earlier sections of the book, when Bhikkhu we were beginning chapter 3. So we were just moving from the introduction to the Eightfold Path into Right View, which is presented as the first on the Eightfold Path. And, I just got to sit with this for a second. So earlier in the book, he's talking about how he says in the suttas things like, in Buddhism, there is no self, there is no worlds. There is no self, there is no worlds. And you hear him talking about that a lot. No self, no world, no self, no world, no ground, no self, no world, no, non-duality, non, no ground. So we're really kind of getting into that here. In Buddhism, all of that is phenomena. Phenomena doesn't have a ground, right? So he's saying, right here, he's saying in a world, right? Our world, this thing we call life. Right, we're here on this ball, this beautiful, beautiful ball called the magical ball called Earth. And to our knowledge, we're the only intellectual life forms to our mass consumer kind of knowledge, right? And we're all kind of living down here and moving around down here and kind of doing this thing called life, being this thing called ourself, doing this thing called life on this thing called world, right? And that's, we're all kind of sharing that experience. But what he's reminding of us here is that this thing called world, this thing called life, is actually this complex phenomena the five aggregates of form, of sense, sensory experience, the six senses, right? So here he's saying, and again, that's kind of getting at what I was talking about earlier, fabrication. If you go back, and this is why I think journaling, I don't think that Buddha ever talked about journaling, but I actually work with journaling and Buddhist ideas a lot with my clients because, sometimes it could just be really helpful to put a pen to a paper on some of these things, like, especially when you hear like wild statements like this, right? Like, what do you mean there's no, I can feel, look, I'm standing here, I'm touching this chair, I'm looking to this person in the eye, what do you mean there's no, and yeah, absolutely. But also, if you sit in meditation long enough, and this is why he says, you really do kind of need to see for yourself, and that's certainly my experience, is that if you sit in meditation long enough and you really develop a practice, then you actually do experience the ear disintegration, the nose disintegration, the tongue. I mean, in other words, you blow your mind is what happened. You really, and if I hadn't experienced that, I still wouldn't be doing it like 20, however many years later. So, I don't know what that is or what any of that is. I don't know of any, but this is what Buddha says here about world. As soon as the phenomena, our subjective experience of phenomena, snuffs out, poof, sound, poof, smell, poof, taste, poof, touch, poof, thought, then poof, right? And any residual clinging that we've got going on, here comes the cosmology we bring with. So, there you go. Pretty wild, right? It's pretty wild stuff. I got a little bit more time. I'm going to take it. The complexity of karma. So we're now at that subheading. What are you saying? It wasn't complex before now? What are you kidding me? Okay, here we go. Sutta 64. These four imponderables. Yeah, you think? I love that. These four imponderables are not to be speculated about. Whoever speculates about them would go mad and experience vexation. Which four? The Buddha range of the Buddhas, and then in brackets, i.e. the range of powers a Buddha develops as a result of becoming a Buddha. The jhana range of one absorbed in jhana, i.e. the range of powers that one may obtain while absorbed in jhana. The results of karma, speculation about, in brackets, the origin, extent, purpose, etc. of the cosmos is an imponderable that is not to be speculated about. Whoever speculates about these things would go mad and experience vexation. Oh man, I love that. And that comes from AN 4:77. Well, that's certainly how I make Buddhism work for me for well over a quarter of a century. He's saying, and that's another thing that I like about Buddhism for myself and my nature, kind of how I am, is that he's not, the Buddha doesn't seem to be particularly interested in any of that. He came up in that, right? He came up, and again, thank you to the member of our community who came up in the culture in which, and understands a lot. Hey there. Oh, hello there. Yes, indeed. Let's see. Give me 1 second. And wow. It is so good to see everybody. Holy cow, this is wonderful. I've never had this many people here before, and it's really great to see ya. You're fast. Okay, so that's the book. And we are on page, where are we right now? We are on the bottom of page 160. That is what we want to do, isn't it? And I don't think that people that practice Buddhism are unique in that sense. I think that that's part of the human condition. It's obviously this is my opinion, but I think that humans are just marvelously intellectually curious, and we want to understand. We want to know. No, I need to understand and know, and that's why we're amazing, and why we're, like on the moon and going to Mars, and it's remarkable. It's really, really remarkable, but it's imponderable, says the Buddha, on a certain level. And what I think you'll find in Buddhism also is, and again, remember that, the Buddha was quite practical. It's very much, the Eightfold Path is very much a path of action. It's very much a practical path of action. And not just the path, but also, like the Sangha, or, looking at earlier sections, these supplementary factors that he talks about, admirable friendship and another voice, which you'll find earlier, that are very, very key and also very important. But he says, there's some stuff here that's kind of just beyond, and as I mentioned, and I've talked about this before, so I won't go too much in detail. I don't really sit in really, really long sessions anymore because I have arthritis. I have from being a distance runner when I was younger and not being very mindful and skillful with my body. And so now I'm in my 50s and I have arthritis in my SI joint. So it's really hard for me, really. And somebody wrote this actually in the Discord server earlier. They were like, wow, how do you practice, quote unquote mindfulness? And I love that because mindfulness is so, at least in the West, it's like, what does that even mean anymore, right? It's just being used so much to market things. But they said, how do you experience mindfulness when you're in incredible pain? And I get it because I have chronic 24/7 pain or discomfort. I'm not sure, the words, are dicey. So all I can say is that I have had some spontaneous, really only once, many years ago. And then at a very long retreat, I had a jhana experience that could be described here, where, if you've listened to my earlier episodes, where my mind was completely blown and where, not in a bad way, just more of like a, oh, way. So, and that's kind of what he's getting at here is, some of these things we can really kind of get into the weeds with. And that's okay to get into the weeds too, from my view. I would just say so long as the weeds don't become a trap, because I think that our mind, we are quite clever. And I just actually wrote another post about this because somebody in this community last week asked, hey, from your view, as somebody who you said you study psychologies, so what do you think the Buddha knew about how humans behave or psychology, that he kind of recognized, and then I kind of wrote about some of the things. And that's kind of what I meant in that post is like, wow, our brains, we can rationalize any behavior. It's amazing, really, what we, our minds are, we can be quite deceptive to ourselves. We go through incredible gymnastics mentally to avoid cognitive dissonance, right? These are things that all humans do, right? So these are things that we do. So because we're like that, he warns, this is good, having these conversations, this is one of the legs of the three-legged stool in Buddhism, one of the jewels, but don't let it bind you up. Don't get so caught in the thinking mind that you're not actually doing the very embodied practice of Vipassana, So, okay, oh, look at the time. Okay, well, I think I'm going to stop reading here, but I really enjoy it. I'm so happy to see this many people here. Oh, wow. Thank you for coming. Oh, great. I see some typing, so I'm just going to kind of hang out. All right. So if this sounds a little bit different than what you just heard, I'm actually laying this down a couple of days later because I had quite a few people join me this particular week, which was really lovely. So at any rate, if you're listening in the YouTubes, thank you so much for listening. And I hope that you were able to get something from it, and take good care. Bye.